You never quite know when things are going to go wrong in boating, but one thing's for sure, if you're out there on the water long enough, things will eventually go wrong. Just like this crew found out this past week when traversing the Suez Canal. The vessel seen here is the lift vessel Red Z1, and unfortunately for this crew, as they were part of a northern convoy traversing the Suez Canal, the vessel wound up losing steering. The incident occurred near the 45-kilometer mark near the Contera West Ferry dock. Fortunately, no injuries were reported during the incident, but you can see the Red Z does wind up going into the quay, causing damage to the property and as well to the vessel. The Red Z1 is a 217-meter lift vessel, and it was currently en route from the Netherlands to Sudan during the time of the incident. The Suez Canal did release a statement following this, praising themselves basically, as they were able to get the Red Z freed and ungrounded in under 60 minutes, only causing minimal delays on the canal. Our next story to make the boating news this week is going to take us over to Virginia, where this was the scene just a little over a week ago, approximately 30 miles off the coast of Virginia Beach. The vessel seen in the images here is the 57-foot sport fishing vessel Turn Me Loose, and unfortunately they went out to enjoy a day of fishing, but as you can tell, things did not go their way. After they started their morning, things were going okay, but they noticed the vessel began to take on water. They quickly alerted the U.S. Coast Guard that their ship was taking on water and they were planning to abandon ship into a life raft. Fortunately, the crew was prepared to be offshore. They had an E-perp, they had a life raft, and were able to successfully grab life jackets before abandoning the vessel. The Coast Guard did quickly arrive to the scene in under an hour to find the crew safely in their life raft with life jackets on board. The Coast Guard commended them for having all the proper safety gear for being offshore, which allowed them to get out and rescue the crew quickly. The vessel wound up floating off the coast for quite some time though. The Coast Guard was issuing warnings for boaters to be aware of the vessel out there. Our next story to make the boating news this week is going to take us up toward the Great Lakes and over to Ohio, where this was the scene just this past week when the 406-foot cargo vessel, the Tsunanavic, wound up having an incident on the Cuyahoga River and actually wound up becoming wedged between the two shores of the river, blocking access for any vessels to get by. U.S. Coast Guard Sector Eastern Great Lakes received the initial report of the vessel grounding a little after midnight and immediately dispatched a 29-foot response vessel to the scene to try and see if it could assess the situation. Upon arrival, they found the vessel wedged between the two shorelines. They assessed damage to the docks and walkways in the area, but the vessel itself appeared to be sound. At the time of the incident, the vessel was carrying approximately 35 tons of cement. Two tug vessels were called into the area to try and break the ship free. Fortunately, around 6 a.m., the two tugboats were able to unwedge the vessel and get it moving back along the river on its way without any major damage to the ship and no injuries to any person. An investigation has been launched by the U.S. Coast Guard to try and determine the actual cause of the incident. At this time, it's undetermined if it was human error or possible mechanical failure. The Tsunanavic is an interesting ship, though. It was built in 1978, and it is owned by CSL, who operates a global fleet. But one of the interesting parts of this particular vessel is this is the first cargo vessel to ever operate on the Great Lakes under both power and sail. A sail system was added to the vessel just a few years back, in addition to its normal propulsion system, in an effort to try and improve fuel economy and lower emissions. I'll be interested to see if that played any role in the vessel getting stuck in this situation. Our next story to make the boating news this week is going to be a very controversial one, and it's going to take us over to the Bahamas. As many of you may know, we do several trips a year by boat down to the Bahamas, but things are quickly changing down there, as just this past week, the Bahamas has announced changes to their customs and immigration policy on how vessels actually enter the Bahamas. Those changes involve increases in temporary cruising permit fees, as well as some of the requirements vessels must meet in order to actually even enter Bahamian water, which has caused quite the stir, as some of the cruising permit fees basically have almost tripled. Currently, if you have a 34-foot or smaller vessel and wish to enter the Bahamas, you can purchase a cruising permit for $150, which is good for up to 90 days. Starting with these new fees that are actually going into effect starting July 1st, the cheapest cruising permit you can buy will be $500 for a vessel under 34 foot. And in the current regulations, that $150 one you get actually includes your fishing permit. Now that is gone, and if you want to fish in the Bahamas, you must also purchase another additional fishing permit for $300 on top of the $500 cruising permit, meaning a group going fishing just this past month could have went in for $150. Now it would cost them $800 to enter the Bahamas to spend a few days bouncing around some islands and enjoying some time fishing. Now, I will admit, I've been going to the Bahamas for over 10 years almost every single year, and as long as I've been going, there's not been an increase in these fees, meaning that the increase in fees is likely well overdue, but many of the boaters I've talked to are up in arms on this one just by the size of the increase. For many boaters, especially coming from South Florida, it's not uncommon for them maybe to only go once a year just for 4 days to Bimini. Well, if they're going over there to go fishing for 4 days now, their cruising permit's going to cost them $200 a day. And to top it all off, some of the other requirements that changed were that all vessels that were entering the Bahamas must have AIS and that it must be turned on at all times, even if you're on the dock. We did fortunately get some relief on this one during the last reading.
To Clause 7, delete Clause 7 and substitute the following. Insertion of new Section 40B into the Principal Act. The Principal Act is amended by the insertion immediately after 40A of the following as a new Section 40B. 40B, Automatic Identification System. 1. Every foreign vessel 50 feet and over in length that is in Bahamian waters shall at all times A. be equipped with an automatic identification system, B. ensure that the automatic identification system is properly functioning, and C. ensure that the automatic identification system is turned on. 2. For the avoidance of doubt, subsection 1 applies whether the foreign vessel is A. docked in the Bahamas, B. traversing the waters of the Bahamas, or C. passing through the Bahamas. And 3. An owner of a foreign vessel or the master who contravenes subsection 1 commits an offense and is liable on summary conviction to a fine of $1,000.
While the AIS change was definitely a win for most of us, because here in the US we have some pretty lax rules on AIS, and most of us with pleasure boats actually don't require having this installed, meaning that on top of the fees that we're raising almost 300%, you're going to have to go out and spend money to add AIS to your boat. But fortunately, we'll be able to bypass that one, at least most of us, with vessels under 50 foot. But we'll see what actually winds up happening with these fees. There's a lot of people complaining about it. I've got a feeling they're staying though. I don't think the Bahamas is going to go back on this one. They actually changed their fees for aircrafts last year and had similar blowback, and still those fees never went back down. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But I think one of the things we're going to see happen is this is going to encourage people to go to other locations like the Keys instead of the Bahamas. And even worse, what I fear will happen is it's going to encourage people coming over from Miami and South Florida just to not check into customs and immigration, to not have to pay the fee. Let me know your thoughts on this one in the comments below. But thanks for watching, crew. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Boating News of the Week. If you ever see anything crazy happening out in your waterways, be sure to hit us up on Facebook or Instagram and let us know, and you might see your stories over here. And if you guys haven't already, go ahead and drop an anchor on the subscribe button.